She understood not what, a kind of wooden machine, in which the lord of her heart sat. There had been a time when pride and royal majesty of soul had shed such grandeur over York, that, when exposed as a show, he had excited reverence, not scoffing. Now he was evidently laboring under great physical suffering. His brow was streaked with mortal paleness, his cheeks were colorless, his fair hair fell in disordered ringlets round his youthful but wan countenance. He leaned his head against the side of the machine, his eyes were half shut. It was not shame but suffering that weighed upon their lids, and diffused an air of languor and pain over his whole person. Catherine hastened towards him, she knelt on the unworthy earth at his side, she kissed his chained hands. "You are ill, my love, my ever-dear Richard, what has happened? For you are very ill." Roused by such music from the lethargy that oppressed him, yet still overcome, he replied, "Yes, and I do believe that all will soon end, and that I am stricken to the death." She grew pale, she called him cruel, asking him how he could dream of leaving her who was a part of him, alone in the desolate world. "Because," he answered with a faint smile, "the world is kind to all save me. No taint, dear love, attaches itself to your name, no ill will mark your fate, when you are no longer linked to such a thing as God has spoken, and told me that this earth is no dwelling for one, who from his cradle to this last shame has been Fortune's stepchild and her despised toy. How often have I been dragged to the utmost verge of life? I have felt indignation, anger, despair. Now I am resigned, I feel the hand of the Mighty One on me and I bow to it. In very truth I am subdued, I sleep away the weary hours and death will end them all." With every expression of tenderness, Catherine endeavored to recall him to life and to herself. She spoke of another escape, which it would be her care to achieve, of the solitude, of the paradise of love they would enjoy together. "My poor girl," he replied, "teach your young heart to seek these blessings apart from me. I were the very wretch tutor stigmatizes me, could I live under a memory like this. Forget me, my white rose, paint with gaudier colors the sickly emblem of my fortunes. Forget that, duped by some strange forgery, you were wedded to Perkin Warbeck." In spite of himself, large drops gathered in his eyes, swelling the downcast lids, and then stealing down. Catherine kissed them from his cheek. 1,000 times more noble, royal, godlike she called him. Had not the best and worthiest suffered ignominious punishment, even our blessed Lord himself, his own acknowledgement alone could disgrace him. He must recall the false words wrung from his agony. This last vile act of his enemy must awaken each sovereign on his throne to indignation. Each would see in him a mirror of what might befall themselves, if fallen. James, her royal cousin, roused by her, should resent the stigma affixed to his kinsman. "For your own sake, sweet, do so. My soul dying within me is alive again with indignation, to think that your plighted wedded love is he who is exposed to contumely. But for that, methinks I would call myself by that wretched name I dared pronounce, so that the annals of the House of York escaped this stain. Yet even thus I seem more closely allied to them, for violent death, treachery, and ill have waited on each descendant of Mortimer. My grandfather bore a paper crown in shame upon his kingly brow." He was interrupted by the officer, who unclosed the instrument of disgrace. Richard, weak and failing, was assisted to rise. Catherine supported him as a young mother her feeble offspring. She twined her arms round him as his prop, and in spite of misery was enraptured once again to see, to hear, to touch him from whom she had been absent so long. "This is not well, it must not be. His Majesty will be much displeased," said the chief of the guard, witnessing the compassion her tender care inspired. "You must return to the palace, lady." "One little step," pleaded Catherine. "If I should never see him more, how should I curse your cruelty? I will not speak as I half thought I would to these good people to tell them that they may well honor him a princess loves. Drag me not away yet, one more goodbye. Farewell, noble York, Kate's only love. We meet again, this parting is but mockery." She wept on his bosom, the sound of wailing arose in the crowd. The prince's eyes alone were dry. He whispered comfort to her. He promised to live, to baffle his foe again for her sake. The words revived her, and she saw him depart with hope, with new joy kindled in her bosom. There had been another, the public gaze, till Catherine came to draw all eyes to a newer wonder. An emaciated, pale woman in a garb of penury who knelt telling her beads beside York's prison. Her face was hid, but her hands were thin and white to ghastliness. During the last scene she had sobbed to agony, and now, as the place cleared, went her way silently, with slow, feeble steps. Many marked her with surprise and curiosity. Few knew that she was the Jane Shore, whose broken heart whispered misery, as she thought that she beheld King Edward's guilt, in which she had shared, visited on his son. This cruel lesson of religion was a canker in her heart, and most true it was, as far as regarded her royal lover, that his light loves, and careless playing with sacred ties, had caused the blot of base birth to be affixed to his legitimate offspring, and so strewed the sad way that led them to untimely death. Henry, cruel as he was, had not the courage to encounter his insulted prisoner on her return. Catherine's feelings were wrought too high for any display of passion. Her anxiety was spent on how she could soothe York's wounded feelings and restore his health. It were vain to ask, she feared. Yet, if the king would permit her to attend on him, under whatever restrictions, they should be obeyed. And this while poor Elizabeth besought her pardon with tears, for being the wife of her insolent adversary. She, a proud Plantagenet, was more sorely stung than the White Rose by the indignity offered to her house, and she entreated her not to love her brother less because of this foul disgrace. So doing, said the quick-sighted queen, you fulfill his dearest wish. While you are Richard's loving wife, he, even he, the fallen and humiliated, is an object of envy to his majesty, who sought, by making you witness his ignominy, to detach you from him. How strange a mistake, replied Catherine, for one so sage as the king. The lower my sweet Richard falls, the more need he surely has of me. But that love, such as ours, knits us too indivisibly to admit a reciprocity of benefit. I should say that it is to make me rich indeed, to enable me to bestow, to lavish good on my lord. But we are one, and I but give to myself, and myself receive, if my weakness is of any strength to him. Dear sister mine, your liege, wise as he may be, is a tyro in our woman's lore, in the mysteries of devoted love. He never felt one inspiration of the mighty sprite. This was not quite true. For some few days Henry had been so inspired, but love, an exotic in his heart, degenerated from being a fair, fragrant flower into a wild, poisonous weed. Love, whose essence is the excess of sympathy, and consequently of self-abandonment and generosity, when it alights on an unworthy soil, appears there at first in all its native bloom, a very wonder even to the heart in which it has taken root. The cold, selfish, narrow-hearted Richmond was lulled to some slight forgetfulness of self, when first he was fascinated by Catherine, and he decked himself with ill-assorted virtues to merit her approbation. This lasted but a brief interval. The uncongenial clime in which the new plant grew impregnated it with its own poison. Envy, arrogance, base desire to crush the fallen were his natural propensities, and when love refused to minister to these, it changed to something like hate in his bosom. It excited his desire to have power over her, if not for her good, then for her bane. The Duke of York was imprisoned in the Tower. No further measures were apparently in action against him. Catherine no longer hoped anything from her foe, and day and night there lay beneath her eyelids the image of Richard, wasting and dying in captivity. Something must be done, some aid afforded him. She was anxious also to learn the details of his flight, and how again he fell into the hands of his foe. Monina, who in 1,000 disguises had been used to penetrate everywhere, was seen no more. Still public report informed her of many things. It was known that Sir Robert Clifford, the old spy and traitor of the White Rose, had become aware of the measures taken by York's adherents to ensure his escape from England. He had followed him down the river, and by a knowledge of the signs and countersigns of the party, decoyed him into a boat that was to convey his victim back to his prison house. The deceit was discovered, and a mortal struggle ensued on board the tiny bark. It sunk, and many perished, Clifford among the rest. On the morrow his body was found upon the beach, stiff and stark. A gaping wound in his neck showed that the waters alone had not been his foe. In his clenched hand, he grasped a mass of golden hairs, severed by some sharp implement from the head to which they grew, as if naught else could liberate his enemy from his hold. There he lay, bold Robin Clifford, the dauntless, wily boy, hunted through life by his own fell passions, envy, cupidity, and libertinism. They had tracked him to this death. His falsehoods were now mute, his deceptions passed away. He could never more win by his smiles or stab by his lying words. Death alone had a share in him, death and the cold sands beneath which he was interred, leaving a name, the mark of scorn, the symbol of treachery. They had struggled beneath the strangling waves, Richard and his adversary. The prince was wounded in the scuffle, and became enfeebled almost to insensibility before he could sever from his enemy's grasp the fair locks he clutched. He swam away, as well as he might, and with the instinct of self-preservation, made for the shore. He forgot that England was a wide prison. He only strove to master the fate which beat him to the ground. He reached the sands. He sought the covert of some near underwood, and threw himself upon the earth in blind thankfulness. Exhausted, almost inanimate, he lay there, given up only to the sense of repose and safety from death, which visited his failing heart with a strange sense of pleasure. The following morning was far advanced, before he could rouse himself from this lethargy. He looked upon the waters, but the Adalid was no more to be seen. He was quite alone. He needed succor, and none was afforded him. Well, he knew that every field, lane, dingle, and copse swarmed with enemies, and he shuddered at the likelihood that unarmed, and weak as he was, he should fall into their hands. He desired to reach London again as his sole refuge, and he journeyed, as he hoped, towards it, all unknowing of the route. No wayworn traveller in savage lands, pursued by barbarous enemies, ever suffered more than the offspring of Edward IV amidst the alienated fields of his paternal kingdom. Cold and rain succeeded to the pleasant summer weather. During night he lay exposed to the tempests, during day he toiled on, his limbs benumbed, his heart wasted by hunger and fatigue. Yet never, at the head of the Scottish chivalry, never in Burgundy, or in England, did he feel more resolute not to submit, but baffling fortune and his enemy's power to save himself in spite of fate. He had wandered far inland, and knew not where he was. He had indeed passed beyond London, and got up as high as Barnes. It was the 4th day from that of his escape. He had tasted little food, and no strength remained in him, except that which gave energy to his purpose. He found himself on a wide, heathy common, studded with trees or desolately open. The rainy day closed, and a bleak east wind swept over the plain, and curled the leaden-colored waters of the river. His love of life, his determination not to yield, quailed before the physical miseries of his lot. For some few moments, he thought that he would lie down and die. At this time another human figure appeared upon the scene. A Benedictine lay brother, who, in the freedom of solitude, in defiance of wind and rain, trolled a ditty fitter for a ruffling swaggerer's bonnet than a monk's cowl. He started not a little, on perceiving our wanderer leaning against the scathed trunk of a solitary tree, nor less did he wonder when he recognized the fallen prince. It was Heron himself, the magnanimous mercer, who, having effected his escape with a well-hoarded purse, contrived to introduce himself into the house of Bethlem, at Sheen, which was called the Priory. He was a little frightened to perceive his ancient leader, but pity succeeded to fear, and with many fair words and persuasions he induced him to permit himself to be conducted to the Priory. There, since he believed himself to be dying, he might receive the last sacraments. There perhaps, for some few minutes, he might again behold his Catherine. Thus was the fugitive again led within the pale of his enemy's power. The prior, a man esteemed for holiness, did not delay to make his sovereign acquainted with the capture of his rival. His awe of Catherine having vanished, Henry was left at liberty to follow the ungenerous dictates of his groveling spirit. Many a courtier, true man or false, counseled the death of the aspiring youth, and they praised their master's magnanimity when he rejected this advice, and in lieu exposed him, whom he knew to be the descendant of a line of kings, to beggarly disgrace. Thus worn and weak, the ill-fated son of York was made a public spectacle of infamy. But Henry went a step too far, and when he thrust the Scottish princess forward on the scene, he turned defeat to triumph. He was not to die, but rather to pine out a miserable existence, or had the sage monarch any other scheme. The high-spirited prince was to be cooped up within the Tower, there, where the Earl of Warwick wasted his wretched life. Did he imagine that the resolved and ardent soul of Richard would, on its revival, communicate a part of its energy to the son of Clarence, and that ere long they would be enveloped in one ruin? Some words had transpired that appeared to reveal such an intention, and his order to the lieutenant of the Tower, that, without permitting, he should connive at any covert intercourse between the two, his recommendation of a noted spy and hireling to a high trust, and the order this fellow had to bring each day intelligence to the palace from the prison, spoke loudly of some design, for Henry never did aught in vain. It was in circulation also among the lower officers in the fortress that an attempt to escape was expected on the part of the prisoners, and that rich reward would attend its discovery. Chapter 54. Chapter 999. Prisonment in the Tower. And bear at once, captivity displayed. Stands scoffing through the never-opened gate, which nothing through its bars admits, save day, and tasteless food. Byron. The Lady Catherine, no longer trusting the good intentions of the insolent tyrant, was eager to communicate with her royal cousin of Scotland, to urge him to save from death or disgrace, if not to effect the liberation of him to whom he had given her hand. The difficulty of finding a messenger was great. The queen, all amiable and sorrowing as she was, shrunk from any act, which if discovered would enrage the king. Where did Monina tarry while her friend was in this strait? Of all his sometime associates was there not one who would risk all to retard the last steps of fate? Since York's escape she had been so vigilantly guarded that 1,000 schemes she had formed for her own evasion proved abortive at their very outset. Help was at length afforded her unexpectedly, when most despairing. Edmund Plantagenet stood before her, changed indeed from what he had been. She had not seen him since the siege of Exeter, where he was wounded, but slight was his bodily hurt in comparison to the death blow his mind received. Plantagenet was one of those concentrated characters, whose very outward show of softness and gentleness serves the more to force the texture of their souls to receive one indelible impression. He had passed a boyhood of visions, given up to mighty aspirations and engrossing reverie. His thoughts were stirring as the acts of others. His forest school had so tutored him that he could live in bodily repose, while his mind ruminated. He could be quickened to hope and fear, to lofty ambition, to generosity, and devoted courage, feeling in his heart the keenest impulses, while around him were the mute trees of the wild wood and pathless glades. He could be satisfied with such dreamy illusions, so that action with him was never the result of physical restlessness, nor of youthful emulation, nor of that stirring spirit of life which forces us to abhor repose. It flowed from an imperious sense of duty, it welled up from the very sources of his soul. Other men perform the various parts allotted to them, and yet are something else the while, as is the actor, even while he struts in the garb of royalty, but Edmund yielded himself wholly up, and was the mere creature of the thought within. To be great and good, great from the good he should effect, was his boyhood's aspiration. It is probable that, if he had not been subjected to extraneous influence, he would have devoted himself to religion and become a saint or martyr, for his understanding, heart and person would have been given up to the holy cause he espoused. His being led to King Richard's tent, the night before the Battle of Bosworth Field, gave a new and inextinguishable law to his life. Unknown duties were imposed. The first and dearest was to redeem his father's soul from the guilt of murderous ambition by elevating his injured nephew to his original greatness. He devoted himself to his cousin. Soon, he learned to love Richard as the work of his own hands. He had reared his tender infancy. He had been his tutor in martial exercises, teaching him to curb the fiery steed, to wield the lance, and more than all, to meet danger in the field fearlessly, to be honorable, brave, and kind. He had led him to war, and shielded him with his own body from the cruel Moor. If ever they were divided, his thoughts dwelt only the more carefully with him. Last, he had brought him from glorious combats in Spain to conquer his ancestral kingdom and set him up the rival of a powerful king, the mark of his vengeance. It was all over. Edmund possessed no innate strength to rise from the blow. He was a mariner on the wide ocean, without compass or rudder. The universe had one central point for him, that was destroyed, and a total blank remained. York's first surrender visited him as a death stroke. He struggled against it. Enfeebled by his wound, more by despair, he passed over to Ireland. There he expected to find friends of the White Rose. He found only enemies of Duke Perkin, men eager to exculpate themselves from the charges of ill faith or ingratitude, gladly adopted a phraseology or a belief that reduced to dust the golden glories of poor Edmund's idol. Perkin Warbeck, O thou flower of York, thou nursling of love, though child of calamity, is even thy bright name so to be tainted, not by those immediately arrayed by self-interest against thee, but by the vulgar crew, ever eager to crush the fallen. There was no hope in Ireland. Keating, the prior of Kilmainham, was dead. The Earl of Desmond was reconciled to the English government. Lord Barry had fled to Spain. The citizens of Cork were busy redeeming, by eager servility, their mayor's disloyalty. Overcome by these sad changes, a malignant fever seized on Edmund. In addition to every other disappointment, he had the consciousness that his aid was necessary to his cousin, that his absence was probably misinterpreted by his friends as cowardly dereliction. York was calling on him in vain. Monina perhaps suspected his truth. Next to the son of his life, the noble Richard, Monina lay nearest his heart. It was a mixture of many feelings, and even love, subdued by hopelessness, quickened them to greater intensity. As soon as he could rise from his couch, he directed his course to England. He arrived in London on the day of the Duke of York's worst disgrace. It was reported to him as the gossip of the town At the fatal word, a mortal change seized upon his frame. His limbs were as if struck by palsy. His cheeks fell in, his hair grew white. On his arrival he had taken up his abode in a monastery in the habit of a poor pilgrim. The sage monks who beheld his state possessed no leechcraft to administer his cure. He lay with beating pulses and open eyes, while the work of the grave appeared already in operation against him. He wasted into a fleshless skeleton. And then another secret change came over him. He conquered death and crawled forth, the ghost of what he was, into the hopeless world. He contrived to gain admission to the princess. She did not recognize him, such was the pale disguise disease had put upon him. His voice, hollow as from a tomb, was altered. His dark, melancholy eyes, occupying too large a portion of his face, gleamed from under his streaked and wan brow. Yet his was a visit of comfort, for he could do her mission to Scotland, and invite the forgetful James to succor his friend and kinsman. Edmund listened eagerly to this proposal. A draught of soothing balm descended into his frame, with the thought that yet all was not lost. His physical energy almost returned. He hurried to depart. "How will you traverse this wide kingdom?" asked the lady. "Cannot the Adalid come as before to aid and speed you on your way?" "The Adalid is sailing on the far ocean sea," replied Plantagenet. "We are all as dead, in the eyes of Defaro and Armonina." Faithless girl! With a trace of his ancient warmth and sweetness, Edmund entered upon the gentle maiden's exculpation. He related that a poor fellow lay on the bed next his in the convent hospital, whom he recognized to be an Irishman, who had escaped from Waterford, and sailed with them in the Adalid to Cornwall. From him, he heard the tale of what had befallen Defaro and his child. He heard how the mariner had long haunted the English coast waiting for an opportunity to carry off the prince. Of the fatal night, when snatching his daughter from the watery peril, he saw Richard, as he believed, perish in the waves. What more had the Moorish mariner and his daughter to do with this miserable, guilty island? He called his men together. He told them his resolve finally to quit the eastern world for the golden islands of the west, inviting those who were averse to the voyage to go on shore at once, before the fair wind that was rising should hurry them into the open sea. The poor Irishman alone desired to land. Before he went he saw the Spanish damsel. He described her as calm and mild, though there was something unearthly in her gleaming eyes and in the solemn tone of her voice. "If," she said, "you meet any of our friends, any who ask for Defaro and his daughter, if you see Lady Brampton, Lord Barry, or Sir Edmund Plantagenet, tell them that Monina lives, that she tarries with her father, and tasks herself to be his comfort and support. We seek the Western Indies. Well may it betide us that we never reach the unknown strand. Or we may be cast away in an uninhabited solitude, where my care and companionship may stead my dear father much. Or I may teach the sacred truths of our religion to the wild Indians, and speak the dear name of Christ to the unbaptized of those wilds. Or soften, as best I may, the cruel Spaniard, and save the devoted people from their barbarity. Tell them, whichever way I look, I perceive 1,000 duties to which our great taskmaster calls me, and these I live to fulfill, if so my feeble body will permit. Tell them that my only hope is death, and that by my obedience to the Almighty will, I may partly merit to join in paradise the earthly angel who now survives there." Tears choked further speech. She imprinted her words by a gift of gold. The boat which had been hailed came alongside. The man on board, the sails of the Adalid swelled proudly in the gale, the little caravel ran lightly along on the top of the roughening waters. In less than 2 hours she was out of sight, speeding swiftly over the sea towards the wild western ocean. Plantagenet departed, and the princess was yet more cheered when she found that no further injury was meditated against her lord. Imprisonment in the Tower was his sole punishment. Her pure, gentle mind could not divine the full extent of King Henry's villainy, nor guess how he undermined the edifice he claimed praise for not leveling with the ground. Nor could her resigned, patient, feminine spirit conceive the cruel, biting impatience of his lot that York endured. He had yielded at first to the overwhelming sense of disgrace, and felt that last, worst emotion of the injured, which answers the internal question, "What have I done so to be visited?" In the poet's words, "I cannot charge my memory with much save sorrow, but I have been so beyond the common lot. Chastened and visited, I needs must think that I was wicked." But soon his eagle spirit spurned the tame debasing thought. He resolved again to struggle, and at last to conquer. The fire burned brighter for its short smoldering. Almost with a light heart he laughed, as he resolved again to endeavor. His prison life was more than irksome, it was unendurable. No change, which is the soul of enjoyment, varied it. No sympathy, the parent of content, came anar. In his young days he had trod on the verge of life's wave, watching it recede, and fancying that it would discover glittering treasures as it retreated into the ocean of eternity. Now the tide ebbed sullenly, the barren sands grew dark, and the expanse before afforded no hope. What was to be done? He was in the tower, whence he had twice escaped, where the Earl of Warwick was immured, pining in fruitless vegetation, rather than living. Should he do as he had done, and become a cipher, a forgotten prisoner, a mere thing to wake and sleep and be as nothing? The very dog that guards a cottage door from nightly harm had more dignity and purpose in his life than this victim of ambition. The bird that alighted on the sill of his iron-barred casement and carried off a crumb for her nestlings was an emblem of utility and freedom in comparison, which Warwick, cut off from all, must weep to mark. How different was Richard's fate! He had dear friends ready to risk all for him, whose life's sacrifice he could repay only by being true to himself. He had a wife, wedded to him in youth's early flower, whose happiness was unalterably linked to his. He had courage, fortitude, energy. He would not cast these gifts away, a thankless boon. He valued them at their price. If death crowned his efforts, it were well. He was a mere toy in the hands of God, and he submitted. But as a man, he was ready to cope with men, and though defeated, never to be vanquished. Not a month after his removal to the Tower, he had observed his facilities, marked his instruments, and resolved to enter on his schemes. They were quickened by other circumstances. Warwick heard of his cousin's arrival, and he believed this to be the signal of his own deliverance. His first chief desire was to have communication with him. Among his attendants there was one to whom he could apply. He was a lank, tall fellow, with little understanding and but one idea, gratitude to the Duke of Clarence. This man, called Roger, and nicknamed Long Roger, his length being his chief distinction, had been very poor, and burthened besides with several infant children. Accidents and a bad season brought them to the verge of starvation, when a chance threw him in the way of the Duke of Clarence, who got him made servitor in the Tower. When this unfortunate prince was imprisoned within its fatal walls, Long Roger underwent 1,000 perils to wait on him by stealth, and to do what service he might. Long Roger had a prodigious appetite, and his chief delight was to smuggle dainties, cooked by his Madge, into the prison chamber of the Duke. The manner of Clarence's death, which Roger affirmed to accord with the popular tradition, alone consoled the faithful, sympathizing fellow. Now he had turned the key for 13 years on the Duke's hapless son. In spite of his watchful care and proffered cates, he had seen the poor youth dwindle to a skeleton, when suddenly the progress of delay was checked by Our Lady. It was a miracle to see Lord Edward grow fat and comely to look upon, changing his woebegone looks into gracious smiles. By the Mass, there was witchcraft in it. Warwick often thanked Long Roger, and told him what he would do when restored to freedom and rank, which will never be, Roger said, except among the saints in paradise, unless it pleased God to remove his majesty, when my lady the queen should fully know how fervently her cousin prayed for her. And forsooth, with sweet Prince Arthur, his royal mother would be all-powerful. Long Roger's visions went not beyond. He never imagined the possibility of effecting the Earl's escape. His limited understanding suggested no relief, save a bottle of canary, or bunches of white roses in June, which in fact was Dame Madge's feminine idea, and often had the simple flowers soothed Warwick's care. To this man the poor prisoner applied, to enable him to see and converse with the newly arrived Richard. 2 are better than 1 to a feast, and the next time Roger meditated a dainty supper for his lord, he resolved to endeavor that York should partake it with him as a guest. In his own guileless way, the simple-hearted man began to practice on and bribe one of his fellows, without whom it had been difficult to accomplish his desire. Abel Blewett had lately been appointed to his service. He was nearly a dwarf, with bushy eyebrows and red hair. There was something of ill omen in his physiognomy, but as the tall yeoman looked over the head of his comrade, his courage rose. The whippersnapper could not rebuff me, he thought, as he drew himself up to his full height, and began to propound the mighty deed of conducting Perkin by mistake to the Lord Edward's chamber, on his return from vespers. Roger paused suddenly, for in spite of his stature, he was appalled by the glance Blewett shot up from under his penthouses of brows. Still he gave a willing assent, and even took upon himself the chief risk of the undertaking. The following evening, while Richard was yet pondering how to commence his machinations, undecided though resolved, and while he made up his mind not to betray his thoughts to the sinister-looking being before him, He was surprised to find that he was led through an unaccustomed gallery, and still more on entering the chamber into which he was introduced, to recognize it as that where he had unexpectedly found refuge during his last visit to the tower, and to perceive that Warwick himself was there expecting him. Was this the thin, wasted being he had seen 3 years before? Had Warwick been then set free to hunt upon the hills, he had not regained more flesh and bloom than now that hope had been his only medicine. His cousin York had inspired him with marvelous confidence. His last entrance into the formidable tower, and his speedy exit, had appeared a miracle to the poor earl, to whom these high walls and sad chambers formed a world, from which, as from the larger one, death only promised egress. He had pined and wasted in his appetite to be free, to be without those gates, beyond that fosse and giant battlements that girded him in. These portentous, insuperable obstacles were mere cobweb chains to Richard. He had come in, he had departed, and all as easily, so Warwick thought, as the unregarded fly, that had perhaps flown from Westminster, from Elizabeth's chamber, to light upon his cheek. In all the subsequent tales of York's checks and overthrow, he smiled at the idea that one born to victory could be thus overcome. He laughed at the chains Henry had thrown over him, and his transfer to the Tower elated him with a firm belief that liberty was at hand. Dwelling on these thoughts, Warwick ceased to be the dead alive. He was cheerful, erect, elastic in his gait, his complexion glowed with health, while sickness lingered still on the cheek of the younger Plantagenet, and a more subdued spirit dwelt in his heart. Long Roger beheld the cousin's embrace. He heard the earl call him, named Perkin, his liege, and most dear kinsman. From that moment the opprobrious name was banished from Roger's lips. He was convinced of York's truth, and the Lord Edward's friend became an object of reverence and of love. Chapter 55. Attempt to escape. Gentle cousin, if you be seen, you perish instantly. For breaking prison. No, no, cousin. I will no more be hidden, nor put off this great adventure to a second trial. Two noble kinsmen. Quick on the first greeting followed Warwick's question. And, noble cousin, what have you projected? When shall we escape? Richard's being in durance with him seemed sufficient pledge that without delay they should both be free. While York, wearied by opposition to his mighty foe, just foiled in his endeavors to preserve his freedom, even when he had attained it, saw giant obstacles in his path, and although resolved to endeavor all, was fully conscious of the fatal end that must wait upon his too probable failure. His reply was dictated by these feelings. He was averse to drag one so inexperienced, and so unhappy, into the pit he believed that he was digging for himself. He besought the earl well to weigh the value he set upon life, to place the fatal scaffold in prospect, to teach himself to know what death was, and to be ready to meet it, before he planned escape from the wily tutor. Warwick listened with impatient wonder, but when Richard concluded with affirming that he himself, in sober sadness, preferred hazarding all to the remaining in prison, and that he would be free, the earl's countenance again grew light and gladsome. But when was still his eager question. Thus they had changed characters. Warwick, so many years secluded from the world, was in total ignorance of its ways. Had the tower gates been open to him, he had trembled to walk forth alone, but restraint had made him feminine, and with his cousin he would have rushed upon an army of spears, in sure belief that some unseen aegis would protect him. His position rendered him timid, indolent, and dependent, but he relied on Richard as a woman on her lover. York beheld all things in their clear, true light. He was aware of every difficulty, of the means he possessed for overcoming them, and of the hazards he ran in using these means. A sentiment, born of the highest generosity, made him hesitate before he concerted any plan with Warwick. It was not alone that he was averse to risking another life, but he felt that his cause would receive advantage from this link with an undoubted Plantagenet. Nay, that, in the prison itself, the attachment and respect felt towards the son of Clarence, by some of the very men he meant to use, would serve him. That he should reap benefit from exposing the ill-fated prince to untried dangers, revolted his high and independent nature. Warwick had recourse to many an entreaty and persuasion, ere he brought Richard to consent that their fortunes should be joined, and that, last of the White Rose, they would rise or fall together. Still, York was obliged to check his cousin's impatience, and to show that they must slowly work out the end they had in view. To gratify the earl's greedy curiosity, York related his adventures, they afforded him an inexhaustible fund of surprise and delight. He sighed over his tale of wedded happiness, and half wondered that angelic woman, seated high on the throne of loveliness and love, should deign to devote herself for man. A pang, not of envy, but of regret on comparing their fates, shot across him. Soon the usual current of feeling returned, and when he heard that his idolized, lost Elizabeth was the friend and companion of the devoted wife of York, his affection for Richard was increased. Night was far advanced before they separated, and then only in certain expectation of meeting again. York's hopes grew brighter, and he indulged in visions of the future, which lately had been so blank. He verily believed that he might escape, though still he doubted whether he should. He remembered the fondness of the Duchess of Burgundy for her brother Clarence, and how she had deplored the hard destiny of his offspring. He would present that son, liberated by him, to her. His junction with the prince must revive the old Yorkists in his favor. This worst blast of fortune might be the gale to speed him to the harbor of his hopes. The royal cousins met again and again, nor was it long before their own desires, and Henry's craft, began to weave that fatal web which entangled them even in the very mode the hard-hearted king devised. Summer was gone. Quicker than he was wont, the sun withdrew his embattled array of light and heat, and cold and tempest, erewhile driven to mountain fastnesses or to their own frozen kingdoms in the north, took courage and force and broke with wild fury upon the defenseless world. The bleak winds were their coursers. Savagely they yelled and howled over the land they desolated. First, the growth of flowers was their prey, the fruits, and then the verdure of the earth, while the sun, each day retreating, afforded further scope to their inroads. York resolved not to pass another winter in prison. He had quickly perceived that his purpose could only be effected by corrupting their guards, and then all would depend upon the fidelity of these men. His first attempts were followed by an almost too easy success. Good-hearted, dull-headed Long Roger heard with unreplying credulity the assertions of Warwick, that Richard must succeed in all he undertook, and readily promised his aid. Abel Blewett, in spite of his dogged, sinister aspects, yielded at once to the seduction of a promised bribe. Two others, by his advice, were associated as necessary to their success. Strangeways, a ruffling drunken fellow who had been thrice dismissed, but whose pretty wife each time procured his reappointment, and Estwood, a saving miser who lent money to his fellow servitors on usury. With these instruments the cousins went to work. Warwick in full belief of success, York perceiving treason and discovery close to them, but ready to defy these bloodhounds to their worst. "And now, cause," said Warwick, "in very truth there needs no further delay. Methinks were the drawbridge down, you would mistrust some gin, and wait to throw an arch of your own across the moat. Sooth, my lord, I am aweary of your sloth." There was a caressing sweetness in Warwick's voice and manner, an ignorant, indolent, confiding enthusiasm, so unlike quick-witted Clifford, or any of Duke Richard's former friends, that he felt a new emotion towards him. Hitherto he had been the protected, served, and waited on, of his associates. Now he played the protector and the guardian. "My gentle cousin," he replied, "even as you trust, so you shall find me. Wait but a little and all will be past. Yet I grieve to say, where you see escape, I perceive an ambushment of death, and though ready to face the grim skeleton, we must arm ourselves against him. I wish I could show you, even as I see, the dangers that environ us. Perhaps you would shrink, and it is yet time. What do? Not only plan escape, but ally yourself, and give the sanction of your untarnished name to one whom Tudor brands as an impostor and abhors as a rival. His vengeance will fall heavily for this deed if he reach you, while a few years, like the many already gone by, may lead him to his grave and you to liberty. I have too often met danger to be frightened by him, and I endure worse than death. Each day I pass of youth apart, my sweet white rose. You have no ladylove to beckon you across the path of peril. Bethink you well, my ever-dear lord, will you not regret this prison, when the cruel axe glitters before your eyes?" "Do you refuse then to take me with you?" said Warwick mournfully. "Be the choice yours. To go with me is fraught with danger, to stay." "Hush, cousin," cried the earl eagerly, "speak not the ill-omened word. Stay, to endure days and nights of guarded doors, to eat viands served up poisoned by the jailer's touch, to see the sky but through those iron bars. Alas! In my dreams, when heaven and its stars are before me, they are crossed and paled by those accursed lines. Give me but an hour to tread earth a free man, or mark, cousin. Sometimes I win good Roger to lead me to the roof of the White Tower. It is high and overhangs the deep, dangerous river. The day you quit my side, I seek that tower, I leap from its height, and the cold waters shall drink up my being, rather than I endure another hour my prison life. My dear, dear cousin, said York, it is written by the fates, and I yield our fortunes shall be one. A few days now brings the hour, it will move along the dial, it will become a portion of past time, what it will leave us is in the hands of God. That hour came, full soon it came, the evening hour which preceded their escape. Long Roger served supper to the kinsmen, the last they were to partake within the fated walls. The poor fellow heaved a bitter sigh as he waited by his lord's chair. Thou art downcast, good Roger, said the earl. Pledge me, my man, in this ruby wine of Burgundy. Think of tomorrow, not of tonight. Tomorrow the deed will be done. Roger quaffed the proffered bowl. He set it down with another sigh, almost a groan, adding, better drown reason than life in the vat. Then recollecting to what he alluded, and before whom he blushed scarlet to his very ears, and like a bashful man he made it worse by going on blunderingly, I was never handy at these sort of things. It is for all the world like turning out of a warm bed on a cold, snowy morning, only to think of them. And when they are about, by the cross, I thought no hole far enough or dark enough when my lord your father. Roger, exclaimed Warwick. The wine had not decreased the man's terror, but it had opened his mouth and taken away his discretion. He continued, it was an awful night. We all knew what was going to be done. I am sure, as Thomas Paulet said, we heard our very hearts beat. Then there was grim-faced Hobbler, who at the judgment might be taken for the born twin of Master Abel. Only he was taller by a span, even he looked uglier, nor spoke above his breath, is he at his prayers? Asked he, and Sir Brakenbury was as white as the earth itself. It was the beginning of Lent, and the snow lay 3 feet deep on it. By no uncommon law of our nature, the dread design of the present night awoke keen recollection in the usually drowsy mind of this man. At first, with thrilling horror, Warwick interrupted him, but now the very terrors of the theme he chose assumed an awful charm. He was fascinated to listen, while his knees knocked together. Richard felt also the magic of such perilous excitement. O Lord Edward, continued Roger, these walls have seen fiendly sights. The blood of many a Plantagenet, York, or Lancaster is on its pavement. Was it not in this room that the pious King St. Henry, as Father Piers calls him, you will not sleep another night in it, so there is no harm now, telling you that his poor ghost has been seen on the battlements coming from this very chamber, where he was murdered. The night wind rushed round the massy walls, the autumnal wind, fierce and howling. York started up. No more of this unreason, while we need all our strength and God's grace to boot to nerve us to our task. O ghost of Lancaster, if indeed thou hauntest this spot where those akin to me did the foul deed, be thy pious soul propitiated now, many a mass shall be told for thy repose. Roger crossed himself, and said an Ave. Then in his usual voice he rejoined, would the thing did not require blood. Master Abel vows by the saints, 'twere better when men make bad oaths to swear by the fiends, that Sir John must die. Old wrinkled Eastwood squeaks out, By'r Lady, it were not worthwhile, with only promises for reward, if we have not the rifling of the lieutenant's private chamber. They are bloody-minded men, my lord, Matt Strangeways when he is sober, and I fasting or feasting hold out that we might bind him and get the keys. Blockhead, says Master Blewett, saving your presence, thou goest the way to hang us all. Another goblet had set Roger talking. Warwick had quitted the table. He threw open the casement. It was very dark, and the wind howled fearfully. "Oh, iron bars of my prison house," cried the ill-fated prince, "can only midnight murder wrench ye asunder? It is a dread act to disobey God's word and lay the soul under mortal sin, must it be done." "My dear cousin," said York, "do not mistake. A month ago the choice was yours, now there is no going back. We have no right to draw these poor men into peril and then to quarrel at the precaution they take for their safeties. We said I when the matter was proposed. Again I repeat the word, they must look to it, who so savagely have driven us to the fatal pass. When Digby undertook the ungentle task of jailer, he knew that he must hold it at the hazard of his life." "Sir John has ever been kind home," said Warwick. "Forgive the word, my lord, I am firm now, away with mercy. To win an easy egress from these murderous walls, I could myself plant the dagger." "We are not executioners," interrupted the Duke, who felt none of Warwick's vacillations, now sinking beneath the required tone, now wound up far above it, and was perfectly calm though his heart, he scarce knew why, entertained no hope of success. Warwick believed that he should win and mourned the losers in the frightful game. Richard knew that he might fail and assuredly would, did he not meet each necessity and hazard with a dauntless spirit. The sound of a bell from a neighboring convent was brought fitfully by the wind. "They are ringing matins. There is our signal," cried Roger. And Digby's knell. The door of the chamber opened as Warwick said these words, and Blewett, with his usual cat-like pace, slid in. He walked straight up to Roger, and casting on him a glance from under his brows, said only, "Come." "Are all at rest?" asked the Earl,